Hello, and welcome back to Dr. Hollowed. In today's episode, we're going to delve into the world of the supernatural and hear from people who truly believe in the paranormal. So stick around, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
At my work office, we pull down all the shutters at closing time so customers won't randomly walk in after hours. One day I had to stay late to finish up some work and ended up working up to 8:30 p.m. I completed my work and decided I'd head home for the day. As I packed up and walked over to the shutters, I felt this overwhelmingly choking feeling of fear, dread just build up in me. It was dead silent and my hairs began to raise on my arms and my neck. I had the strong feeling that if I walked out right now something terrible was going to happen. So being the pussy that I am, I retreated to my desk and surfed the internet for another 10 minutes. Taking a chance, I looked up at the shutters and yup, the feeling of fear, dread is still there. So I ended up surfing the web until about 9:30 p.m. I looked up at the shutter and nothing. No feeling of fear, dread at all. I closed up shop and nothing was looking out of the ordinary. Needless to say, I hightailed it out of the office and back home. Never felt that feeling in my life and have never felt it to this day, not even when I had a burglary attempt at my home. Still have no idea what caused it. I was always a huge skeptic until I dated a girl who claimed to be a Wiccan. I had seen odd, inexplicable things before, but meeting her changed a lot. She explained a lot and I decided to open myself up to it and let it in. You can make a conscious decision to allow them in, as most spirits seem pretty benign to me. I'm still new at it. I saw/felt a lot of odd shit, but what really convinced me was the fear. It was rare but very memorable. You'll see the entire room get dark, like someone is drawing a shade over the light. You get a feeling of overwhelming dread and heaviness all around you. A feeling like someone is following you, or watching you. The corners of the room are so dark you can't see them even with all the lights on. Sometimes you'll hear what sounds like distant screams and moans that sound heart-wrenchingly familiar. It feels like a specific entity is out to get you. Demonic is the best word to describe it. Sleep paralysis as well, but that's another story. On the other hand, that's only about 5% of my experiences. The rest have been either odd as shit but not evil, or honestly kinda nice. Had a spirit dump all my silverware out on the floor once. That was funny AF. Like I said earlier, I'm incredibly skeptical, so I try to explain everything with science and psychology first. Unfortunately, there have been quite a few things that I can't explain. I'm kind of on and off about believing in the paranormal, but this one incident that really creeped my mom and I the fuck out. It happened 5 years ago, in our previous house. The neighborhood was decent, nice neighbors, lively, cars passing by, nothing odd, so it's hard to believe anything there is haunted. First thing that was really odd was the house next to us. It was always empty, like nobody lived there. However, every once a week, someone would go into the house for couple mins and then leave, despite the fact there's no furnitures or anything inside. The only thing that hung above the door was a cross. Second, whenever my dad's not home, the kitchen area, hallway to the study and downstairs bathroom, and the study is always dark. Sometimes I want to get a quick drink, so I don't bother to turn on the light, or when I do turn on the light, it takes few seconds to light up. Usually in that darkness, there would be a figure just running past me. It's not too obvious like the typical horror movies, but enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. Normally I just pass it off as trick of the mind till my mom tells me the same thing. Third, whenever I go to bed and about to fall asleep, I would hear my bathroom door banging a little, like wind hitting against it. Funny thing is, all my windows are closed. Sometimes I would hear footsteps coming from the bathroom door, but I always just pass it off as hallucination or trick of mind. I'm scared of the dark, so I tend to imagine things. Lastly, I would always stay up late at night, sleeping at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. My mom would also stay up late and be downstairs watching movies while I'm upstairs playing games on my computer. Sometimes I would hear my mom yelling yes. I would go down and ask who she's talking to, and she would ask me if I called her, but I didn't. Sometimes I would hear her calling me and I would go down and see what's up. She then told me she didn't call me. It's pretty creepy, and it could either be something paranormal or just trick of the mind. This one time, it's November 1st here in Philippines, we are fixing the table for a little feast for souls. Me and my sister are in the living room, my mom is in the kitchen, and my dad is on the neighbor getting drunk. Someone say or shout "Eong." I heard it on the voice of my sister like she whisper it, so I ask her what. She told me what? I told her why whisper "Eong" and who is "Eong"? She says that she thought it's our dad shouting "Eong." We fight a little bite about it and run to our mom if she hear it someone say "Eong." She told us that she heard it I say "Eong." We got dumbfounded about that. So I asked my mom who's Eong. She says that Eong is the nickname of my granddad. Later that evening we offer and pray for their soul grandma and grandpa. It's kinda creepy, but it's just our grandpa wanna be remembered. And also I've seen a doppelganger of my two cousin. So here's the story about doppelganger. So the first one is when I was in 5th grade and it's summer. I'm taking a bath outside our house because the dugout well is there. I see my younger cousin walk past near me going to our different neighbor, and ask her where she will go, and she replied, just near there. I clearly remember it because she has this plastic full of bottle caps of soft drinks. We play with it. I find it odd because Therese no one or no children our age there. So I decided to peep to their house and I see her mom washing their clothes. I snitch her out and tell her mom about her going to our different neighbor, and its noon nap is a thing back that time. My aunt is confused what I'm talking about, and she said that she never see my cousin leaving their house. While explaining myself that I clearly saw her walk past near me, my cousin walk out on their house with different clothes and clearly just woke up from sleep because her eyes is like Chinese and her hair is standing. I'm so creep out I didn't finish my bath and just go inside our house and turn on all the lights. I didn't know what it was that time. The second is about my another cousin F, and probably am in my 8th or 9th grade. I don't know why, but I remember we're chasing each other. So I hear her going inside our house and I see her going to the kitchen outside and I chase her. She holds close the door of the kitchen and run off. I run after her in the kitchen and then puff, she's gone. My uncle is sitting there drinking and telling him where's my cousin run. He said that he didn't see her and no one is there and he is just alone drinking waiting for my other uncle. That creeped me really out because I said to myself, what if it's like what happened years ago when I took a bath outside? And then I go to the living room and see my cousin in different clothes again holding ice and coke. She tell me that my mom told her buy this earlier. I experienced poltergeist activity firsthand when I moved into a condo years ago. It was a classic poltergeist with one area of disturbance in the kitchen and a cold spot located in a bedroom closet. The phenomena was like clockwork. Around 5:30 to 6 a.m. the closet would start getting very cold and I had to leave the door open to avoid condensation damage to my clothes and boxes. Around 11:30 a.m. to 12 p.m., a very loud bang would occur in my kitchen and the pots and pans in my cupboards would shake and sometimes fall out onto the floor. What I took away from the experience was the impression it was some kind of unknown natural phenomena. There didn't appear to be any intelligence behind it. It was like Old Faithful in Yellowstone. There was some kind of pressure that was building up and then after a certain point it would release with a bang. It lasted for around 7 months and then faded away on its own. I'll probably never understand the mechanism at play, but I'm pretty sure the cold spot was the fuel source. It was siphoning off the heat from the air, and then using that energy to pound the floor. Why it was localized where it was, I have no idea. I feel fortunate to have experienced it. I imagine that a great deal of people interested in the paranormal never get the opportunity to experience it. The cold spot also dropped my electric bills to around $30 a month in the middle of summer, so that was nice. I wish it'd come back. There's been a few unexplainable things that have happened over the years to me that I would consider paranormal and made me believe, but I'll just give a couple. Once I was alone at my parents' house getting ready to go out, still daytime, and my purse was in the kitchen on a chair. I was in the entryway doing my hair, so the kitchen was on the other side of the wall from me. All of a sudden I hear a chair in the kitchen scoot across the floor and I freak out. I grab my phone and run out the front door and call my boyfriend and tell him what just happened, but I can't leave because my purse is in the kitchen. So I stay on the phone with him and run inside, grab my purse and get the hell out of there. This is also the same house that sometimes when I was alone I would be blow drying my hair, I would hear banging. One time it was so loud I dropped the blow dryer, so I would usually turn the TV on really loud while I was doing it because I was scared. We would also hear footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs. When my cousin was murdered, something weird happened too. She and I grew up together like sisters and I was always there for her. She was living a rough life at that point and I would see her occasionally when she needed something or we were doing stuff with her kids. We didn't know something was wrong until the end of the week because she was spotty with her communication usually. So that Tuesday I was with my boyfriend and I was really sad and crying for no reason. I truly didn't know what was wrong and just went home and cried myself to sleep. It wasn't until Thursday my aunt let us know she hadn't heard from my cousin and she didn't come to visit her kids, so she filed the missing persons report. I got the call early Saturday morning that they found her body. The day of death based on autopsy was that Tuesday. During my wife's and I honeymoon, we stayed in an old Victorian home that belongs to a family friend, in a small town in eastern Oregon. It was one of the first houses built in that town. So obviously, there's a lot of history there. We always had weird feelings inside, like we were being watched, and that others were there with us, and other similar phenomena. The biggest event was that on our last day there, my wife and I went to the basement to pick up and fold the sheets we had just washed and dried. Then we both heard the sound of children running coming from above us. We knew that no one was in the house was with us. So we knew that it was the spirits of those who lived here before. Then after finishing, we left. Bonus, my wife's family got a dog when she was 5 years old, then in 2016, we put him down to sleep. He was 16, he was deaf, almost blind, his hips made noise when he walked, and he had terrible odors all of the time. After being put to sleep, the family still sees him in the house. He still makes the same yelps, barks, grunts and whimpers that he used to when he was alive. It's almost as he never truly left. He's still an unforgettable part of that family. I have a couple. One is more comforting than anything. I was about 10 and my aunt had just died. She was kind of the center of the family. Her house was the place where we all got together and we would spend hours a day there every day. US kids were in the pool just hanging onto the edge and feeling sad because this was just a day or so after she died. None of the adults were watching us, which was a big rule for my aunt. If there were no adults, then we shouldn't be in the pool. So we're all floating there and I was looking at her chair that she always sat in. I guess all of us were actually. Next thing I know, she's there. Watching us and smiling. I wasn't only one who saw it though. I looked at my cousins and asked if they had seen it too and they just nodded. And to make sure none of us were bullshitting, we got out of the pool, got some paper and all wrote down what she was wearing. We all came back with the same description. 2. So this one's on the creepy side. It was me, my sister and her best friend. December 16, 2007 is a date that sticks in all of our heads because of this night. I just witnessed parts of it. Strange things were happening all night. The TVs were all just randomly shutting on and off. Freaked out but trying to stay cool, we all just did our own things. At some point in the night I was with my sister's friend in the kitchen and we hear my sister talking in her room. Thinking she's being weird we laugh and call out to ask who she's talking to. She screams bloody fucking murder and comes tearing out of her room like hell was chasing her, knocking out her lamp on the way out, looking at us so confused. She thought she had been talking to her friend who had been sitting on the bed with a blanket pulled over her head. I was always the one trying to act tough and shit, like I wasn't afraid of anything, even though I'm a bit younger than they are. So I tell them to go hole up in my room and I would check it out, which they were pretty glad to do. I go into my sister's room with a flashlight and peek around. Now my sister's room, long before this even happened, always gave me bad vibes, always freaked me out to be in there. As an 11-year-old, I was shitting my pants. The blanket she was talking about was on the floor, all sprawled out, but nothing else was in there. So we all camp out in my room. All night the TV is going on and off and we can hear the one in the living room doing the same thing, but never at the same time. Eventually we fell asleep. Come morning, my sister's friend tells us about the dream she had, about a little girl walking around in our front yard in circles around this enormous pine tree. It seemed meaningful to us, given the bullshit of the night before, so we go outside. There in the snow are footprints, bare, human prints smaller than my own feet at the time in the few inches of snow we had gotten. They didn't seem to come from anywhere, or go anywhere. They were just there, going around the pine tree. Now, this has never happened again. A few experiences around the house that are never too scary or overwhelming like this was. Human-shaped shadows and shit like that, the occasional feeling like you aren't alone. It's pretty normal, and our house is pretty damn old. But this night was truly fucked up and terrifying and I'll never forget that shit. I once dowsed successfully in my grandfather's basement. I was in my late teens, and already pretty scientifically minded and skeptical about the supernatural. But he was very into that sort of thing, and had me try it. He used a pair of long thin metal rods with 90-degree bends to form handles. I held one in each hand, with the long end pointing straight forward, so they could hinge in my hands. The idea was they would swing inwards and cross when I hit water. This was in a long, thin townhouse basement, and he had a long runner carpet down the length of the basement. All the pipes were overhead, so there was no plumbing in the floor. I walked down the carpet, and sure enough, at the same spot, 4 or 5 times, they crossed. When I expressed my confusion and a general state of WTF, he pulled up the carpet. In blue chalk, he drew a line across the length of concrete that was covered and wrote water next to it. I'm not saying I believe in this, but I never could get that event to fit with the rest of observable reality. I wonder if I tried duplicating the event, but I never have. At my old apartment around a year ago, I was sitting on the stoop outside the porch, waiting for the delivery guy. My car's parked a little to my front right, front yard next to car, and bushes to my left. It's dark, but not that dark BC of the street lights. I'm sitting there and notice this small, smoke-like ball of energy, like a shadowy Tinker Bell, floating above my right side. I watch this thing dart around, then fly mid-air across the street and then back over to the front yard on my left. At this point, I'm like WTF and said to myself, show me you are real, and instantly. My car, which had been off and parked all day, makes a loud tink, tink sound. Then, without breaking a beat, a black cat appears strolling out from the bushes, down the sidewalk, parallel to me and stops and sits directly in front of me and meows, staring me dead in the eyes the entire time. I said, thank you, that'll be enough. And bolted TF inside, locking the doors behind me. I saw that ball of smoky-like energy a few more times. It never felt threatening, just overwhelming. Back in 2011, my grandmother suddenly died in her sleep. She had been discovered in the morning by a concerned neighbor and the body had been removed by undertakers before my dad and uncle arrived a little later that morning, to begin putting her affairs in order and securing the property. When they left the house that evening, they armed the burglar alarm and locked up. The alarm immediately malfunctioned, started sounding, and couldn't be turned off no matter what they tried. They called out an emergency engineer who had to physically disable the system at electrical level before it would stop. This guy couldn't explain the fault and had never seen anything like it, despite doing alarm work for something like 15 years. My grandfather died in 2005, had lived in the house since 1998, with the same alarm system in use all the time. My dad and uncle had even armed it on other previous occasions, again without incident. So it seems rather odd and perhaps spooky that the alarm suddenly malfunctioned for the first time ever just as my dad and uncle were effectively closing the door on my grandmother's life. I was working alone at night at our place of business, drilling on the floor. There is only one door to the place, and the front of our unit is all glass, so I'd see if anyone came in or left. The street out front was empty and all the employees had gone home. There are only 2 rooms, the main room and the restroom, in a tiny 700 square foot place. I worked for about an hour drilling when suddenly I hear either the security camera or the bathroom light, they sound the same, start clicking rapidly, as if someone was pissed off and doing it to scare me away. Click 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 click. I hurriedly jumped up and grabbed my phone to call my husband as I looked for my keys, leaving all my tools and mess behind. He picked up, and as I was looking for my keys I heard a bucket get kicked angrily, coming from the same area as the clicking, about 10 feet away from me. I screamed and bolted out the door. That did it for me. My husband heard the bucket kick over the phone and that sealed it for him, too. The next day or so, I had to stop by during the day to drop something off and use the restroom. I was all alone and nobody was there. I had to unlock the door to enter, and the door is not lockable from the inside, so I know there were no midgets hiding behind anything. Not that there normally are. I'm just eliminating all rational explanations. There is nowhere for a normal-sized human to hide. Anyway, as I was leaving, I was about 6 feet from the door, when suddenly something kicked a bucket hard, exactly like the other night, from the same area. I let out an involuntary scream and bolted outside just. It was unmistakable that something wanted me out of there. Just to give some background on how normally brave I am, I love animals, this is relevant I promise. My immediate reaction upon hearing any evidence of an animal is to run and grab it. For example, one night I was sitting in the dark by a creek when I heard a splashing coming up the shallow creek. It was so dark I couldn't see what it was, but the splashing sounded like an animal, so I grabbed my coat and dove in, capturing it in a hug. It was a huge fish. Another time, hiking in the woods alone, when I started to feel the earth rhythmically vibrate under my feet and hear heavy breathing, I immediately started running to find what I guessed might be an elk. He was fast and I never did catch a glimpse of him, but it wasn't for lack of trying. Had the bucket even remotely sounded like an animal could have made it, I would have happily ran to it. The sound was nothing like a rat or even a stray cat could make. It sounded like a person kicked it with work boots. I am now a believer. I don't know if they are dead people or what, but the paranormal is 100% real, and seemingly intelligent. Unlike a lot of the stories in this thread, mine is actually fairly nice and not spooky. I grew up in a family that had a lot of pets. We mainly had cats, and had rabbits, dogs, fish, chickens, guinea pigs, and other animals over the years, but cats were the mainstay of the family animals. Anyway, one of the cats, Oscar, was a massive ginger cat who was loved by everyone because he was so happy to cuddle and hug anyone, as he would happily put his paws around your neck in a hug. He grew up alongside my younger brother, being introduced to the family 6 months after my younger brother was born, and he survived until he was 18. The cat, that is, not my brother, he's still going happily. Anyway, We unfortunately had to have Oscar put down when he was 18 as his kidneys were starting to give out amongst other health problems. We were all devastated by this, given how much of a part the cat had played in our lives. We did have 3 other cats at the time, who were all special in their own way, but none of them were as cuddly as Oscar. One of his habits was to sneak into a bed, curl up, and enjoy a cuddle with the occupant of the bed, which none of the other cats really liked at all. And so, about a week after his little funeral, I found myself in bed waiting to get up for the day, still sad over the loss of Oscar, when I heard my bedroom door open, paws pad across the floor, a gentle thud as a cat jumped into the bed with me, fur press up against my legs, and a familiar purring begin. I absently reached down to stroke the cat, and found nothing except an empty space that was gently purring away for a few seconds before it stopped. I like to think that it was the ghost of Oscar coming for one last cuddle and trying to comfort me. He was such an awesome cat. I've had a few strange instances where my dreams have predicted the future. I had a bizarre fear for a year that my brakes were going to fail due to a recurring dream about driving a green truck off of a skyscraper because its brakes had failed. I told my mechanic of my paranoia and why after the 3rd visit to him regarding my brakes, and then one day my black Mercury Sable was rear-ended by a green truck whose brakes had failed. Why a skyscraper? Well, I forgot that I had an appointment for a corporate organization moving locally to me because of the drama of getting rear-ended. Sure, not exact, but my mother has described her dreams as being similar and has basically predicted every great aunt's death within 3 days, including my grandmother's, which was the first, due to her strange metaphorical dreams. I also predicted a death via a dream, although it was my best friend's cat, never shared that one with her, but that was my first dream prediction I can remember. I live in rural North Carolina and live near plenty of dirt roads. A friend of mine used to live down one particular dirt road that was about a mile long that used to be part of a train track that went into town. He always told me that the landowners of the dirt road, that the land surrounding were descendants of some of the first slave owners in our county, and that they would use the path after the railroad was added to walk their slaves into town. Apparently they were some cruel owners that liked to behead their disobedient slaves because there was records of said goings on their old plantation. I used to leave his house regularly stoned off my ass or drunk, and most times if I had to piss I would. The one night I actually did leave his house sober, I noticed what looked like tail lights in the distance, except that they were swaying a bit much. At first I thought it was normal being that it was a dirt road, but as I kept driving forward I noticed that there was no dust being kicked up or any disturbance on the road. Curiosity got the best of me, since it was a rarely traveled road that unless you had business on the land my friend lived on you really shouldn't be back there. I sped up to try and catch a license plate or make on the vehicle, but as I sped up the light kept getting further and further. I made it into the pavement and the path kept going straight, but it was only an old overgrown hunting path. It would have been difficult to fit any size vehicle in it, yet I continued to see the lights heading down the path. I immediately felt a cold chill down my spine and it felt as if someone was watching me. Drove the rest of the way home with every light on in my truck playing upbeat pop music, yo, get my mind off it. I told him about it and apparently I wasn't the only one that has seen the lights. For the folks with the stories from Nights in the Woods, I have one that ultimately ended in a logical explanation, I think, in case you do not want to read further. Last October I was in California for 11 days after my brother's wedding in San Diego. Just wanted to drive around the state and visit California places that had captured my imagination over the years, and I love driving almost as much as I love cars. Some destinations: the Pacific Coast Highway, San Francisco, Bodega Bay, where parts of Hitchcock's The Birds was filmed. This movie scared the hell out my now deceased mother. I also wanted to visit Clipper Mills, CA, where the longest audio of Bigfoot was captured one night in 2012. I don't necessarily believe in Sasquatch, but would never discount someone else's experience, especially if I wasn't there. So off I went. Clipper Mills is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, about 70 miles north of Sacramento, very near that dam that was in danger of failing last year. Pretty remote. So after Bodega Bay, I head across the state for my destination, arriving near Sacramento in time for a late dinner. So it's after dark when I set out on the final leg. Very dark. It takes me a good while on all the twisty turning roads to find my way there. I wanted to get to the exact spot the person who posted the above video parked that night. He wouldn't say in his video, so I poked around in comment sections and related videos, and found more or less the spot. Around 11 p.m. I pulled my rented Camry well off the dark 2-lane road to avoid any issues with the very sparse traffic. I saw none whatsoever as I sat in the darkened interior, listening. Allowing my eyes to dark adapt for about 20 minutes. I heard nothing but assorted insects as I sat there. Saw nothing moving at all. Eventually, not wanting to activate the car's interior lighting, I crawled out the driver's side window into the black night. Armed with my cell, no service, a handheld GPS to find my way back should I get lost in the dark, and the red flashlight I use with my telescope. I stand there right by that car window for a solid 2 minutes before I could screw up the courage to move away from the Camry. Eventually I walk up the road, still not hearing anything but bugs. Suddenly, without conscious decision to do so, I veer right and head up into the woods. My feet are crunching pine needles now, and to my mind, I sound like Bigfoot stomping around myself. After what was about 20 minutes I stopped to listen, and added to the insects I hear this faint screeching sound far off in the blackness that doesn't sound insect-like at all. It has more consciousness. The now also thoroughly dark adapted mind is whispering that it sounds like a person in distress. Or a large primate. I remain still. I hear something small scurrying around in the underbrush as well. Followed a minute later by that same forlorn-sounding wail, now closer. Time to return to the car. As I'm walking back to the car, I hear this spooky sound, every 20 to 30 seconds, and now it is coming from behind me and in front of me. Shit. It seems to have a vocabulary of some sort to me now. Different vocalizations, some guttural, some high-pitched, and everywhere in between. My mind is having fun, just fucking with me now. I was never so happy to see a Camry in all my life. I started it up before my ass was in the seat, I think, and half expected to see scores of red eyeballs glowering at me in the headlights, from the dark forest. Now spooked and my mind telling me some homicidal axe-wielding lunatic was nipping at my heels, I went back the way I came at much quicker pace than I had arrived. Out of nowhere, right in front of me, this black lab runs out of the woods on one side of the road and into the woods on the other. I barely missed crushing it. That scared the shit out of me right there. I slowed down a bit, the thought of nearly mowing down an innocent mutt overcoming my mind. Some hour down the road towards Sacramento, when I noticed I had cell service again, I opened my Expedia app and found a nearby hotel for the night. Once safely ensconced in said hotel room, I began scouring the internet on my iPad and came to the conclusion that what I'd heard was a barred owl or western screech owl. Can never be a 100% sure, I suppose. Very creepy though. I'm done with wandering alone in the woods at night. I think. My best friend used to live next door to me in a 400 years old farmhouse. The street had been made around it and other houses were 30 years old. Seriously weird stuff happened in that house. He had a voice alarm clock that would tell you the time when you pressed a button. It used to go off at random times in the middle of the night, but only in the night. The living room was on top of the garage, old stable, and you sometimes heard horses snorting and grunting if you were in there at night. The electrics were brand new, but sometimes you'd get zones that would just lose power totally or partially, even weird stuff like a single bulb in a circuit or the VCR whilst the TV was fine, etc. The stereos had a habit of turning back on at full volume, or on their own, or on a different station. But they were in different rooms, different circuits, different brands and style of electronic. Often you used to see someone out the corner of your eye, but they were gone when you turned your head to look. Quite often this was someone on the drive, usually around dusk. Sometimes you'd be certain you'd see a face behind the window in the main bedroom, but looking back would see a clear window. Stuff used to go missing, shoes, wallets, cables, etc., but after you'd searched you'd find it in the first place you'd looked for it. This wouldn't be weird, but it was consistent, and we were often the only people in the house and together at all times. The house had a weird atmosphere. Kinda oppressive, and you felt like you were being watched all the time. It was decorated nicely and airy, but was just plain creepy. The weirdest bit though was that all of this was fairly predictable. It only tended to happen for a day or so after you'd opened the cellar door. They never used the cellar and it was fairly well sealed and a bit cold, but if you opened the door and waited precisely 30 seconds, you'd get a slightly warm gust of air past you, enough to move clothes a bit. Weird stuff would then happen for a day or so afterwards. His parents sold it after we'd grown up, and the next couple who bought it lasted 4 years before the guy said he'd had enough and he was moving out. His wife was welcome to come with him. The woman who has it now is good friends with my parents and also has weird stuff happen. My parents have moved in with her for a week or so whilst they're moving house a few streets away and are sorting themselves out. They offered to have my 18-month-old daughter overnight, and frankly I'm not having her in that house. I occasionally have precognitive visions. This is something I rarely talk about, simply because being a skeptic myself, I know how ridiculous it sounds. But I have seen future events before they have taken place. This isn't something that happens often at all. It's hard to explain the visions. It's not like I receive massive dramatic movie-like flashbacks or incredibly vivid dreams. The easiest way to explain it is that I begin to imagine these events in my head, almost like a daydream. I have no control over what I see, or when I see it, and due to the way in which I see these visions, it's impossible to tell whether what I've seen is precognition, or simply imagination. The best example I have, and the example that made me convinced that it's the real deal, was September 11, 2001. For a few months to a year prior to the attacks, I would regularly imagine two very distinct and visually similar skyscrapers standing within an urban business district. Suddenly a plane would fly into one, then a second plane would hit the other, both causing massive fireballs and explosions. Obviously, before 9/11, the idea that religious extremists would hijack and fly not one, but two airliners into skyscrapers over New York was practically unimaginable. But I suppose that even if this was accepted as a likelihood, I wouldn't have thought of these images in my head as anything other than overactive imagination. Obviously, this could have just been a complete fluke. It's the only major vision I can recall actually taking place. I've had other much more minor precognitive events. But some of them are so irrelevant that it's tough to tell whether it's simply déjà vu. As I said, I know how crazy this sounds. I have other skills that I feel are ESP related, but much less far out than the precognition stuff, which makes me feel like I'm perhaps just more in tune with these sort of extrasensory abilities than the average Joe. I also believe there is a very real scientific explanation for these kinds of ESP related events, and it's simply a phenomena that we haven't yet come to the point of fully understanding yet. I have quite a few occurrences that make me believe that ghosts exist, but I'll tell you my most recent and bittersweet one. Our cat was poisoned with antifreeze and we had to put her to sleep after her kidneys failed and she wasn't processing water. My BF always feels guilty about her death as she was really trying to avoid the vet injecting into her IV line. She was my BF's baby. He had helped her mum deliver her after she got stuck and spent an hour just rubbing her to get her breathing. Suffice to say he named her Lucky. Needless to say, when she went he was distraught. Since she's passed, I'll see a black and white cat walk across doorways etc. out of the corner of my eye. The other night I thought my small dog was following at my heels, could even hear small footsteps behind me. When I reached my bedroom I stopped, I looked around me expecting to see my dog only to find nothing there, where literally it had felt something was at my heels. My boyfriend said instantly it was Lucky without me saying a thing, just looking round myself. He had seen a black and white cat around my ankles out of the corner of his eye. Think it brings him peace knowing she's still around. I am convinced the paranormal phenomena is real because of all the personal stories that have been shared with me over the years. When you have a person sitting across from you and you see the tears in their eyes, you see them get goosebumps, you see their reluctance to discuss it, it all just makes you believe them. However, I have had personal experiences that convince me that paranormal phenomena are very real. Quick summaries. Ghost phenomena. I grew up in a very weird house that was haunted. Things went missing and were returned to a weird place at a later date. My brother and sister heard and saw many ghost-like things. The whole house was woken up one night by an incredibly loud thud on the floor at the foot of my bed. It sounded like someone dropped a bowling ball onto my upstairs bedroom floor. Nothing moved, nothing fell off a desk or anything. Various other weird experiences too. Lights in the woods, bright light down in the woods in a creek bottom that 3+ people could easily see. We all saw a light that was white with a blue tinge to it, like an electric arc. Slight pulsing maybe, but could be trees/brush. No sound. No smell. No nothing except the bright light that instantly blinked off when 2 of the 3 people, my dad and me, started down into the woods to see what it was exactly. There was nothing there. Bigfoot phenomena. 1 single wood knock in reply to the 3 wood knocks we did on a tree. This happened twice. This was 1 am 2 am. No people/houses/trails in that direction. There was no reply to any calls we did or anything we did before/after those 2 knock series. I have no good explanation for what replied to our knocks. Various other experiences here and there, but it's the personal experiences, both other people's and my own, that make me believe/think/know paranormal phenomena is real. I am just not sure what any of it actually is. My uncle died in a motorcycle accident one night in the early 90s. My mom was closer to him than anyone else in her life. He was a lost soul, though thoughtful, funny, kind. He wrote poetry, taped his favorite songs off the radio on a little cassette, played a good cribbage game. He was a constant in your life, someone you could always rely on for warmth and support. For Mom, who had started out living a very adverse life, he was an immense comfort. It came as a shock to her the night he died. She and the whole family rushed to the hospital to see him. He was in a head-on collision with a phone pole and died immediately. There was no question of his survival. The night consisted of my family clinging to one another, hopeless. How could this have happened? It was in the wee small hours when Granddad dropped Mom off at home, too exhausted from her crying to do anything but go to bed. Waking not long after, she saw my uncle standing by her bed. He told her he was safe now, and at peace. Mom understood after therapy that likely was her mind's distortion of reality in order to channel her grief, but it still brought her a great deal of comfort. And it still does. When I around 3 years old, my parents and I moved into a rather large house, 2 floors, both complete with their own kitchens, bedrooms, bathrooms, dining rooms, and living rooms. There was also a basement that was unfinished, mostly cement floor with a section that could be best described as a hole in the wall, which was partially cemented and the rest dirt. The first series of events occurred after my brother was born. It seemed every night he would start crying in the middle of the night, waking everyone up. When this was happening, I would occasionally wake up before he started, and as I laid on my side looking out my door into the hallway, I would see a figure move past my bedroom door. It was dark and unshapely, but had the distinct movement of walking, but like it was on air. It also had something kind of flow or trail behind it, and moments after this thing moved past, my brother would begin to cry. This eventually stopped when he was old enough for us to share a bedroom. The second series of events happened with the basement. The basement always put me on edge. I never liked going anywhere near it. One event, I had gone down to the basement and saw 2 red eyes, like coals of ember, staring at me from the hole in the wall. On another occasion, I saw what seemed like the shadow of a man cast against the wall and begin to move towards the steps. In both cases, I quickly told my dad about them, and he investigated, but didn't seem to find anything. There was also the upstairs area. My aunt and uncle moved up there for a brief period of time, but quickly moved out. If I didn't like the basement, I really didn't like going upstairs, but it had a weirdness to it. The basement was always frightening, always had an ominous aura to it, but the upstairs was different. Some days it wasn't so bad, other days it felt almost impossible to just get up the stairs, like there was a barrier pushing against me. Either way, I could never spend a prolonged period of time up there. The upstairs had 2 bedrooms, neither of which I ever felt comfortable being in. The master bedroom I would enter if someone was there with me, but even then just going into it left me with this deep-seated feeling of sadness which eventually gave way to fear. The other bedroom was small, big enough for pretty much just a bed. That one I refused to enter, based on several experiences. The first one, I had gone into the bedroom because our cat Max was in there. I was sitting on the bed petting him, when he suddenly tensed up and began meowing at the bedroom door. His mood shifted dramatically as he tensed up, the fur on his back sticking straight up, and he began to hiss. At that moment the door slammed shut, and when I tried to open it, it refused to open. Max was getting angrier and angrier, doing this yowling/hissing thing, standing up like he was going to leap at something. After some frantic tugging at the door, it eventually opened, and we both ran out and downstairs. On other occasions I would go up there, see the door open, quickly close it and go to the living room area to watch TV. When I left, I'd come back to find the door wide open. On one occasion I watched as the closed door's handle turned as it began to open. There are other stories that happened up there, but those were the most profound for me. I've talked to my mom about the place before in the past, and she agrees that it was haunted. She never gave me specifics or stories, just a quiet agreement. My dad, as I mentioned, investigated the basement in those 2 events, changed after the one with the shadow. He used to spend a lot of time down there, but after that day he spent less and less time, eventually refusing to go down there when we moved out a few years later. For what it's worth, I stayed the night with a friend during high school. Me, him and another dude were drinking some beers in this house, and the house was getting ready to be demolished. The only items left in the house were OJ's whole bedroom. He grew up in the house. Hated to leave. Wanted to make it last to the last second, right? Right. So here we are drinking and bullshitting in his room. The TV was on, but we weren't paying much attention. Anywho, we all decide to go to the living room to put a couple sledgehammers through the walls for shits and giggles. We all walked out of the room and the TV immediately turned off. I noticed it immediately and it spooked me. So I asked OJ about it. And he, without missing a beat, goes, "Oh yeah, that's just George," in OJ's typical thoroughbred southern redneck accent. I look at him deadpan AF. He didn't even try to explain. I ask him who in the ever-loving fuck is George, naturally. George is a man who built the house originally and was driving his kids in his dump truck and had the back end raised in such a fashion they could stand really high in it. Well, long story short, they got decapitated on a railroad overpass not but 200 yards from the house, down the country road. George hung himself in the attic. And not only did he hang himself, but the attic is only about 5 feet in height, so that dude put a rope around his neck and lifted his feet high enough, yada yada yada. You get the point. So he went on and on about other shit that George and these kids would do around the house. Stuff out of place. Doors and windows opening, closing. The usual weird ghosty shit, right? Well, I didn't believe a lick of this paranormal bullshit, even with the TV going on and off in front of me. But ol' OJ looked at his clock. It was about 3:45 in the morning. He looked at me and said at 4:04 exactly, "You'll start to hear intermittent tapping noises always in 2Z, tap tap pause 5 seconds tap tap." So, yeah. What the fuck ever OJ. 4:04 hits. Tap tap. Tap tap. Tap tap. Me, OJ and Nate were all in the same room. I could see their hands, feet, anything that could be used to make a tapping noise. It very clearly wasn't them. I turned white. I mean, fucking whiter than the ghost I just realized might actually fucking exist. And OJ just looks at me and goes, "Told you." The most bizarre thing about it though, you couldn't pinpoint the noise. It was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The sound wasn't directional. It was like it was off in the distance, but you couldn't move closer or farther from it. It was just there. Tap tap, tap tap. Needless to say, I refused putting a hole in any of those walls with a sledgehammer. I also did not sleep. And I also got very, very drunk. Still don't know what to think, to be honest, but that's some serious shit, I tell you. Another tale to tell. My friend, Lighty, and I would go out to his parents' farm property all the time with a gator and just explore the 140-acre property pretty regularly a few summers back. As we would come and go, we'd chat with a few of the farmers that sharecrop the land, maybe 4 or 5, and we'd bullshit with stories and whatnot. Now, these guys certainly have a sense of humor, but weren't joking one bit when telling us about the old lady. So, Lighty's grandparents had purchased the land from the bank after an older lady had passed away while living in a tiny 1920s Depression-style shack on the property. 1 room, 4 windows, falling fucking apart, scary as shit. The typical old farmhouse, right? Well, we noticed a trend in the farmers' stories, or at least one in particular. They all spoke of seeing a woman, an old woman, staring at them through the windows at times. Now, I live my life as the devil's advocate. Each farmer, I ask the same question. Which window? My thought is that if they're bullshitting, they'll name separate windows, right? Makes sense. Nope. Each one had the same response. All of them. I was baffled. I should note that these farmers also don't know each other. All from different local neighboring towns, but still were not in contact with the others. No corroboration. No slick, clever let's fuck with these kids type of scenario. No possibility of it just being a lamp in the damn window. Can't be that easy. Still never stopped us from going out onto that damn property. I guess Sue never minded either. That's what we named her. Sue. The window ghost. Also, unrelated because not ghosts but extraordinary, was when Lighty and I were driving on that same property and 2 blue orbs rose out of the water in a small creek, a crick if you will, and just floated on down the crick like they'd done it 1,000 times. 2 orbs. The size of a bocce ball. Apparently Lighty's grandfather told stories of the same 2 blue orbs, as well as a multitude of people in that county. It was like some urban legend we'd not heard of until we told Lighty's dad, who eventually filled us in. It apparently happens all over the place, but only in this county and in this creek. Fucking bizarre. I lost my fucking mind watching those orbs just float in the air, traveling the same speed as the water. I'll never forget it. We didn't say a word during the incident. I've had a lot of undeniable instances over the course of my life, shadow figures, objects taken and replaced, smells, voices, etc. I've never really felt threatened though. Most recent events have all taken place in my mother's house. It's a nice thing in a suburban area, built back in the 70s. I've seen a few things in there that have convinced me more than anything, but only one account of something has been confirmed by the both of us. There is something in her house that will mimic both of us, but never mimics her boyfriend, who actually lives with her while I only used to spend a couple nights of the week there. The first and only instance I caught wind of it was one night when I was dropped off to spend the night before work the next day. My mother lives closer to my second work location, so a few nights a week I'll stay at her place. She and her boyfriend are in the house flipping business, so they spent a majority of last year being at the house they were flipping every night of the week after he got home from work at 6. Point being, whenever I came around, I was always home alone. One night I get dropped off and I open the front door while my back holds open the storm door because I was struggling with my night bag. I leave the door open while I bend down to grab my night bag and I hear my mother's voice in the front of the house with me. She's saying something as I'm bending down, but it sounds so distorted and low that it sounds like she's sick, and I even catch a glimpse of her in her pajamas straightening her house robe before I bend down. When I look back up and ask her what she had said to me, she's not there. I'm confused, as she would have had to literally sprint down the hall for me to not see her anymore. I walk inside with my stuff, set it down, and begin looking for her around the house. Her little Yorkie hears me and comes running while I look. I check the entire rest of the house, there is no one home at all. I'll never forget how her voice sounded to me, exactly the voice of my mother but so otherworldly at the same time, like a video of those cats/dogs that sound like they're talking. A few weeks later my mother told me that one day she and her dog were sitting in the den when she suddenly heard my voice from the front of the house, amiably calling for the dog. The little dog heard it too and came running as commanded. It wasn't a day that I usually come over, so my mom got up to come greet me, except, of course, I wasn't there. She was alone, and she told me that even the dog had started to act a little strangely when it ran to where it heard me. I stayed in a house where the previous owner's wife was a heavy smoker and died from lung cancer. Normally when it was just my friend and I, we would come in and greet the ghost in a friendly way. One weekend that we stayed there we brought extra company and I don't think she appreciated them in her home. During dinner one night there were 4 of us sitting around the table. There was a window on one side that had those long vertical blinds and one of my friends sat with his back to the window. Suddenly mid-conversation the 3 of us facing the window saw what looked like someone walking by the blinds and running their hand along them. At that same moment my friend, whose back was to the window, jumped up and yelled something just touched me on the back of the neck. It all happened within seconds and there was no way he would have seen what we just saw behind him. That same weekend the door to the garage would randomly open and shut. We had been staying at this place all summer and never went in the garage. It was just storage, so we kept it closed and locked. One evening I opened a can of cinnamon rolls to bake, came back after preheating the oven and a bite had been taken out of the raw dough. Nobody owned up to this, but just odd timing of it all. The weirder part was I was the last to bed and the first one up. When I woke up I noticed that the fridge magnets had been rearranged. Originally the whole fridge was covered in magnets, but not organized in any way. I looked closer and there was now one front and center of the woman who died and her kids, and the rest of the magnets surrounded it. Last thing from that weekend was we didn't smoke inside the house at all, but I had taken a picture in the kitchen and when I got the film developed it looked like my friend had a double exposure of cigarette smoke surrounding him. This was just the beginning of my odd paranormal experiences in my life, but it definitely made me a believer. I never believed in the paranormal until a few years ago. I was using an Ouija board with a few friends and it wasn't the first time I had ever used one. In the past nothing ever happened. It was obvious that we were the ones moving the slider, and it was something that we used to make fun of each other. But this time was different. It was very different from the beginning. There was a strange feel in the room and something I had never felt before and haven't felt since. When I took the slider I was moving it, but it felt as if I wasn't alone. The slider proceeded to move in ways I was not moving it, and after a few quick seconds it began to spell out the word leave. I told my friends something was going on and they all thought I was kidding and trying to mess with them. Then the slider, moving on its own now, spelled out now and we all were freaked out. Before any of us could do anything a flower pot in my friend's living room flies off its table about 4 feet and smashes to the ground. We shuffle to put the board away and go outside, and as we are going outside my friend screams and is claiming something hit him. When we get outside, all freaked out at what just happened, he lifts up his shirt and realizes a hand print on the center of his back. I have never used an Ouija board since and have never doubted the existence of the paranormal since that day. I moved into an apartment building after getting my first job at 18. Over the years I've been in all of the apartments in that building, but I only ever rented 2. Creepy things happened all the time. We mostly just brushed it off as old pipes/faulty wiring/drafts, etc. The place was built in the late 19th century. It made sense. There was one time that I actually came face to face with what I can only assume was a ghost, and I never went back in that building again. It's weird, when your brain sees something it knows can't possibly be there. In that moment something in my mind just snapped, and I was overwhelmed by absolute, instantaneous, pants-pissing dread. All over a face, in a hole, in a ceiling. A face that, after making eye contact, backed into the darkness as if retreating into shadows that simply weren't there. It's been 11 years and I can still see it. It had no eyes. Just black sockets. Gaunt face, drawn lips, and no teeth in its mouth. It looked afraid. And it was white. So white. There was no sound, in that moment. I remember that too. This thing didn't move. It was just there, and then gone. I don't know what it was. I know nobody would sleep in that room. I know that after seeing this thing I climbed down off of the chair and walked out of that apartment, never to set foot inside again. I know that now I still get creeped out even walking past that building. And I'm not going to sleep tonight, now. Damn it. My mother went through a rough divorce and the man just wasn't the most fun person to be around. Well, he had a son, and I haven't seen him in probably 5 or so years. We're both in our 20s but completely different, and we were never close as he lived with his mom and only saw us maybe once a month. Both prior to and after the divorce, I just never saw his son and never had the need to. He never crossed my mind or anything. Well, about 9 weeks ago I'm lying in bed at like 10 p.m. and a thought flashes across my mind. Ex-stepbrother is really lucky to have his mom because his dad is kind of crazy. I had met his mom, my stepdad's ex-wife, maybe 4 times in my life. I had absolutely no reason to be thinking about either of them. The next morning I'm teaching summer school and playing the name game when I get a text: stepbrother's mother died last night in a motorcycle accident. It was in news as we are in SF, but I won't link it. I was so speechless. Why on earth did all of that pop into my mind at that exact time? It really made me a believer. Not sure in what, but a believer nonetheless. A couple years ago I lived way out in the middle of nowhere, maybe 20 miles from town. My trash can was a good 50 feet from my house. I procrastinated taking out the trash, till 11 p.m. at night. I walked to the can and threw the crap away, but something with claws and human-like fingers grabbed me by the leg. I couldn't see because it was 11 at night in the middle of nowhere, no city lights to shine. But this was Oklahoma, you don't go outside without at least a knife, but I had a fucking machete, and I smacked that motherfucker in the face with it, and it screeched like a coyote having sex. I ran back to the house and that 50 feet felt like 500. I lived in a trailer house though. I wasn't poor, but we moved around a lot and it would have been pointless to get a house. But some of you may know, animals can crawl under your trailer. This thigh crawled under the trailer, and I could hear it moving and scattering. Sounded like a 4-foot tall raccoon. That thing freaked me the fuck out. The noise it made was hell. I'm glad it was too dark to see its face. I don't want to know what that fucking monster looked like. So many experiences, so little time. I suppose I can start with one that had happened in public in broad daylight. There was a Macy's women's department in the mall, and my aunt and I were just there, waiting for my parents to return. We were near the shoe section when for some reason, I had been transfixed by this one particular shoe on a shoe stand. There was nothing peculiar about it at all. It was simple, and it couldn't have been moved unless someone took it and chucked it across the room or if a very strong convenient wind took place. Neither happened. Instead, the shoe itself launched itself right off in the middle of broad daylight, but nobody had noticed it except for myself and my aunt. I began looking around, but aside from the mysterious shoe, everyone had gone on with their lives as normal, not noticing the thing. It landed on the floor a good 2 yards away. 10/10 landing, I would say. I later found out that the Macy's first floor is haunted by 3 ghosts. And that's just one experience. I've always believed, and experiencing it for myself is something that just confirmed it, not that I needed confirmation. I do hope I get to experience more in the future. I think it's fun. Not exactly ghostly, but still made me question almost all my beliefs. When I was about 6 to 7 years old, I was walking down a brick path with a woman who spoke to me in French. I had never seen this woman before. She told me to sit on the edge of the fountain and wait for her while she bought produce from an old-fashioned fruit stand. I followed instructions and sat down on this stone fountain. Looking down at my clothing, I was wearing a white button-down shirt, khaki vest, with khaki pants, and nicely polished leather shoes. I remember noticing this wooden plane placed next to me on the fountain. I picked it up and looked at it while I hummed/sang Frère Jacques French version of Brother John. Halfway through the song, I see people running past me all in one direction. Looking up, I see soldiers begin to fire onto the innocent people around me. Frantically, I looked up and couldn't find the woman I was just with. Next thing I know, I'm falling into the fountain and seeing the water turn red around me as I look into the sky. My ears were ringing, but I don't remember any pain. I began to feel cold and everything slipped to black. Next thing I remember, I awake in my bed feeling as rested as I ever have. I realized everything I thought I experienced was just a dream and was very odd. The clothes I wore, the fact I was speaking French, and actually knew that I was speaking French. I went about my day as normal, playing with my train set and humming tunes to myself. I began singing Frère Jacques perfectly timed for my mom to be just earshot of me. She listens outside my room for a minute and asked me where I learned that. I told her about my dream and she just told me how weird that was just before changing the subject. About 5 years later, I was talking about weird dreams with my mother, and she brought up this story. She told me she was secretly mortified that I, to such detail, could recall so much of that experience. At the time this took place, she asked me what words were said in my dream. I was able to tell her fountain and sit in French at 6 to 7 years old when she asked. Thing is, I had never heard French up to that age to her or my knowledge. Anyway, about 3 years after this discussion, I remember looking through online pictures that I needed for a presentation on D-Day. I came across this one picture that seemed familiar to me. I stared at this war-torn plaza, only to feel my blood run cold. It literally felt like time stopped along with my heartbeat. I could completely remember my dream and every sight, smell, and sound from it. I felt something stir deep within my heart as I recognized this area as being the one from my dream. I felt as though something within me had shifted on a spiritual level. My mom was told many times when I was a child that I was an old soul. I don't have any other memories quite like this, but after that experience, I will be the last person to challenge that statement. I don't remember why, but I was heading home at a super late hour, maybe 10 or 11. The whole time walking home I felt super uncomfortable, inexplicably too. It was just a gut feeling. Walking down the main street, out of my peripheral, were people. Except they were kind of weird and not moving, kinda just, very still figures. I quickened my footsteps after noticing how still they were. Didn't dare look at them directly and shit. Got to the bottom floor of my complex. For security reasons, there's a camera in the corner that captures who's outside the gate and in the streets. When you enter the code and get in the complex, the TVs display the live footage from outside the door, so you know what the street looks like for a good 500 meters. When I got inside and looked at the TV and saw that the streets were empty as fuck, my insides chilled to sub-zero. Worst part is this happened on Qingming Festival, damn it. My best friend's aunt died under some fairly mysterious circumstances when we were younger. It took several days for anyone to realize they hadn't heard from her, so her body was left in her house several days. Fast forward to when I was 15 and he was 17, it was late one night in the summer and we were hanging out at his house. The three of us, myself, my brother and our friend, were discussing the paranormal and similar themes, and Brian told us about how he was convinced that it was all real because of some stuff he saw happen in his aunt's old house a couple years earlier. He convinces us to ride down to her old house and check it out, see if anything creepy happens. 45 minutes later, we arrive at the house. It's been nearly 10 years since anyone lived there, so everything is choked out by weeds and tall grass. Brian grabs a bag of flashlights and a video camera, and we walk up onto the front porch. At this point, my brother loses his nerve and goes back to the car. Brian and I continue toward the front door and I feel it. A heavy, freezing cold presence just in front of the door. Even though it was a summer night in North Carolina still pushing 90 degrees, I had goosebumps all over my body. It took some coercing on Brian's part, but I went inside the house with him. We immediately turn on all the flashlights and he fires up the video camera. He's telling me the story of how he and his dad stayed here for a few weeks after his parents got divorced, and I start to lose my cool. The biggest part of the story was how he woke up in the middle of the night to see a tall silhouette standing in his doorway. Thinking it was his dad, he doesn't mind. When the silhouette turns to leave, he rolls over to go back to sleep. Instead, he decides to get up and grab a glass of water. He walks down the hall, and sees the silhouette heading into his dad's room. Young Brian decided to follow it, still thinking it's his dad. Instead, he reaches the door to see the shape pressing a pillow over his dad's face, trying to smother him. He yells and turns the light on, and the shape disappears. So at this point I'm already pretty convinced there's something there. But we press on, and Brian sits down at the kitchen table. He asks his Aunt Linda to let him know if she's still here, and we wait. Maybe 30 seconds go by and one of the cabinet doors slowly opens. Unconvinced, Brian asks her again to tell him if she's here. The hall closet door slams open, and two more kitchen cabinets open. I'm finally done. I grab my flashlight to go and the storm door of the front of the house slams shut and my flashlight went out. And that's the night I decided that there was definitely some truth to it. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear cannot move how it did, and it was not a normal wolf as they can't comfortably run on two legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007 I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, that is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 to 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on two legs crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting, and I look back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded right on our asses barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. Thank you for reading. At the end of last year I had to move back in with my mum due to the breakdown of my marriage. My mum lives in a house which was built in the late 1900s, and a lot of surrounding houses have been rebuilt over the years due to bomb damage in World War II. It was probably the hardest time of my life as I was adjusting to being newly single, a recovering alcoholic, a single mum, and keeping a full-time job at a funeral director's. Strangely enough, I could comfortably stay late at work in my own in the cold room presenting people in their coffins on my own. However, I would dread going home to my mum's house. The atmosphere was just off. My mum had often spoken of her house being haunted by a lady she called Mary, and had claimed that she woke up one Christmas Eve with a lady in a 1940s tea dress stood in her room looking out of her window. We had been there that night, when my ex-husband and I were still together, and filmed our little boy wandering around upstairs, with inexplicable lights following him around. The stairs led to 2 rooms, one on the left, Mum's room, and one on the right, spare room. The bathroom was downstairs, attached to the kitchen. My mum's always been a bit of a drama queen, so we brushed it off. However, once I'd moved in with her and she went to work, she worked night shifts as a nurse, leaving me alone in the house, I started to notice things. I would wake up at 3 a.m. with my bedroom door slamming open, hear people walking around downstairs, the cupboard under the stairs would open its door randomly, and I could hear my son's toys going off. Despite spending 90% of my time around dead people, I felt petrified. The atmosphere was all wrong, so I did what any 25-year-old would do and hid under my duvet until Mum got home at 7 a.m. A couple of weeks later, I was sitting on my bed chatting up people on Tinder when something hit me and fell onto the bare floorboards by my bed. It was one of my knitting needles which had been embedded in a ball of wool across the room. I haven't really got a rational explanation as to how it could have flown across the room like that. In January, I took an overdose in the spare room. I had lost my job that day and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I took 360 tramadol, with some other meds and a liter of vodka. Obviously I ended up surviving, but had done quite some damage to my body. I sat in the lounge trying to read a book when I saw someone peep round the doorframe from a height. The stairs are right behind the doorframe, so it was as though someone was stood on the stairs peering round. My mum was sleeping off her shift at the time and her bed is noisy, so I knew it wasn't her, and this person, or Mary, was unnaturally white. I moved out into my own flat in April and really couldn't wait to see the back of Mum's house. Just too many horrible memories and the overwhelming feeling that I wasn't wanted there. My Nana had bought me some pots and pans so I could cook at mine, and she'd left them in my mum's dining room on the table. I picked them up on my way through town and discovered that my mum had moved in the grandfather clock which her grandfather had made. My Nana gave it to her with the promise that she'd fix the mechanism which made it bong every 15 minutes. As I picked up my pans, the clock bonged really loudly and I scuttled out. I told my mum later that the clock looked great, although it was a bit creepy in her house with the noises it made. That's when she told me it didn't have the weights or pendulum, so it would have been impossible to make a noise. My Nana and my uncle have both stayed at my mum's house and have had similar experiences. I try to stay away because although I don't think anything harmful is there, it makes me feel unsettled staying there for any length of time. Hail Mary. I was at a party pretty stoned and drunk and asked my friend to take me home. She had a friend of hers drive me home, and I told her friend, whom I had never met before, to pull over cause her grandmother wanted to talk to her. She pulled over and I gave her messages from her grandmother who had been dead for about 2 months. I had initials of men that her grandmother wanted her to stop messing with. I had never met this girl, and I'll probably never see her again, and it felt like I had no control over my mouth. I was still in my body and was conscious of what was happening, but I felt like thoughts were being dropped into my head and the words were coming out of my mouth with no effort on my part whatsoever. I thought I was crazy. She was sobbing in the front seat. It was bizarre and I thought nothing else of it. Until a week later I was on Twitter and had to get offline cause everyone's dead uncle wanted to talk to them. I went to dinner with my friend and told her about her dad who used to sit in the corner of his favorite bar drinking tequila. Then some guy walked by me on the sidewalk while we were eating lunch on the patio and I told him I had to talk to him cause his Aunt Rose wanted him to change the light bulb in his mom's closet. He started crying and thanked me. I looked up the symptoms for schizophrenia and was convinced I was schizophrenic, but there's no way I could know someone's dead aunt's name and how she died and about the light bulb in the closet, especially some guy who I literally pulled off the sidewalk. I haven't had an incident like that in years. I miss it, cause I was able to bring closure to a lot of people, but it was scary and overwhelming to deal with. Definitely made me question my sanity, a lot. I wholeheartedly don't believe in the paranormal. Have lived in remote regions, served in combat, and have lived for a better part camping/hiking/running in the woods to not be spooked or terrified of a lot of the unknowns in this world. Here is where all that changed in a moment. My friend and I were seated in my living room. It was a townhome with only one door and sliding glass patio door for entrances. The sliding glass door was in the living room, and the main door 15 feet south of the area. We watched some show I cannot recall at pretty low volume due to us having a roommate asleep that had to work early the next day. And then, I shit you not, clear as fucking crystal, a girl whispered hey from behind us. I sat motionless as every fiber of my being was electrified attempting to register what was happening. After 5 to 10 seconds after I thought I was finally losing it, my roommate says, "Did you fucking hear that too?" We ran through the house attempting to find the perpetrators. Nothing. No sign of entrance, everything was dead bolted, bad neighborhood, no other person there. It made no sense. But that hey will never leave me. It was a voice. I heard it clear as day, like it was a friend 5 feet away attempting to get your attention. I did not believe in such, and I still hold the view that 99.999% of such observations are either of following: intellectual misinterpretation, that is, you settle for a paranormal reasoning instead of a rational one, overvalued idea, hallucinations, sleep paralysis, some medical cause like CO poisoning, drugs, high fever, culturally patterned deductions, or even outright delusions. However, my own experiences, shared by multiple people at different times, but within the same place, over an extended period of time, convinced all of us, the observers/victims/subjects, that paranormal per se exists. Just how do you explain a levitating bed? High enough for me to leave scratch marks up on the ceiling? Both me and my wife having to wake up to an irritating knock on our bedroom door in dead of the night, to see my father staring at me and carrying a very angry look, saying absolutely nothing as we ask him was everything alright? Escorting him back to his bedroom, opening his bedroom door to discover that my father was sound asleep on bed, and the entity who we had escorted being nowhere? It all happened in late 1990s to early 2000s. We sold that house. I can narrate load of such like happenings, but that is why I am a believer. As a child, I had 2 imaginary friends that were siblings. The girl had one arm that was see-through, but with an outline, your generic ghostish arm. I don't really remember them, but my dad has brought up how I used to play with them and talk about them. Then, his girlfriend and her young son move in. He starts to say that he plays with 2 young kids, and describes a pair of siblings, one with a water arm. He says that they protect him in his room. His room, which was my playroom as a kid. I refused to be in it with the door closed and was always terrified of it, even as a teenager. Couldn't tell you why, just freaked out. Even people who came to stay said they never wanted to stay in there. We had a few instances of the door opening/closing on its own, but you just brush those things off as an adult. So basically, this young kid was freaked out by the same room and never wanted to sleep in there, would always sneak out to the couch, and had my exact imaginary friends even though I was mainly out of the house at that point. I lived in a house with a poltergeist for around 15 years. The house was Victorian and the poltergeist just used to steal things and then put them back in odd places weeks later. We often found my dad's and my glasses in funny places in the morning after we'd put them on the bedside table at night, like the cat's food bowl or, once, in the garden. My A-level Latin set textbook of the Aeneid went missing for 2 weeks before turning up in the fridge, a month before my exam as well. That one was irritating. A coffee table once moved from the downstairs living room to the living room upstairs overnight. We found a plant from the garden dumped on our dining room table once, roots and soil and all. We set up cameras for a few months at one point after I found my glasses in the garden, because we thought maybe one of us was sleepwalking or the cat was stealing things, but no sleepwalking, no kleptomaniac cat, and no floating objects or anything either. It was like stuff would dematerialize and rematerialize somewhere else. I don't know if it is real. In fact, I don't think ghosts are real. But I also don't know what the fuck I saw. About 10 years ago I was working as a private investigator. It sounds cool, but it's actually not. You spend about 3 to 5 hours each day driving to your cases, stake them out in a blazing hot car with the engine off for 8 hours, and then spend 1 to 3 hours in a hotel room writing up your reports before finally getting some sleep and doing it all over again. I did this job for about a year after completing my training to be a medic in the Army Reserves. I was young at the time, so the idea of making $50K a year and traveling all over the country while living out of a suitcase seemed appealing to 19-year-old me. As I said above, you spend a lot of time driving in areas you are not necessarily familiar with. On one of these late nights I found myself driving on a twisting mountain road just outside of Taos, New Mexico. The area was heavily wooded with narrow roads that curved sharply without a lot of places to turn off since you were driving up and around mountains. In the middle of the night, as I maneuvered my rental vehicle through a curve, I saw a woman stumbling along the side of the road carrying a small child. The sight caught me off guard and sent a shiver down my spine. It was so unexpected and so out of place. There were no houses or businesses around me, and it was around 2 a.m. and pitch black. This unnerved me, but what sent the shiver down my spine was the way she moved. She lurched along with what I can only describe as a shuffle straight out of a George Romero zombie flick. And she didn't look up or acknowledge me as I drove by. She just stared aimlessly at the road in front of her. You have to remember, I was a 19-year-old that was fresh out of a year of extensive Army training. I was in peak physical shape and I thought I was Billy Badass at the time. I had spent a month working in a trauma center as part of my training, so I didn't and still don't get freaked out by these things, but this scared me. I drove on for a minute or two thinking about what I saw. Who was she? What was she doing out here at this time of night? How did she get here? The more rational part of my brain took over from my lizard brain, and I came to a horrifying realization. I had been driving for about 1.5 miles past her and I hadn't seen any homes or businesses. Nor had I come across any places to turn off since I had seen her. And it had been about 10 miles since I had come across a place to turn before I saw her. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong. I realized that she had to be hurt or in trouble. Perhaps she had been in a car accident and was in shock? What if the child she was carrying was hurt? I was a medic. I had trained for a year to help people. Sure, I was scared and unnerved, but how would I feel if I found out later they died of exposure on that mountain and I was too much of a coward to go back and help? Wouldn't I also be scared the first time I saw combat when my friends were depending on me? I had to man up and turn around. And as soon as it was safe, I did. I drove back to where I had seen her, half relieved and half horrified when I didn't find her. I traced the road 6 times. Where could she have gone? There was only a small area on the side of the road and guardrails for miles. I drove and turned around and drove and turned around and drove and turned around. I was obsessed with finding her or finding what had happened. Part of it was out of concern for her and her child. Part of it was about proving to myself that I would do the right thing with my training even when I was scared shitless. After a while, however, it became about me proving to myself that I wasn't fucking insane. I spent hours looking for her. Eventually I stopped my car and started walking along the road looking for any signs of her or any disturbances on the mountain to indicate a vehicle had crashed off the road and down the mountain. I walked that entire 3-mile stretch of road in pitch black with a flashlight, at times yelling like a madman, listening to every twig and echo with bated breath. I didn't even care about my deadline or my next case. I was so sure of what I saw that I was all in. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't seeing things. I wasn't overly tired. I saw her stumbling down that road, there is no doubt in my mind. The image is etched in my memory. But there was nothing. Even when the sun came up and I drove that stretch of road another 6 times, there was nothing. And there were no ways for me to explain it away, even after countless sleepless nights in the 10 years since devoted to it. I don't believe in ghosts. I see the BS documentaries and laugh away their evidence and stupid orbs like the rest of you do, but I also don't know where the hell the stumbling woman and her child came from or where they went. So on the off chance you were stumbling down a windy road in Taos, New Mexico about 10 years ago with a toddler in your arms, please tell me what the hell happened, where you came from, where you went, and that you are both okay. I've been puzzled by it for a decade now. When I was younger I used to collect porcelain dolls. My mom was a huge fan and would often bring me some back from Mexico. The dolls would move out of the corner of my eye, sometimes appear in new places I hadn't placed them. Eventually I got rid of my entire collection out of fear. But this isn't about the dolls. Around 10 years old my aunt used to drop her kid off at random hours of the night so she could party freely. I remember many nights waking up and seeing my young cousin crying standing next to my bed waiting for me to acknowledge her. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. and saw the outline of a small girl with long curly hair. I spoke out to her, thinking it was my cousin. I told her to come to bed. But she was unmoving. The outline stayed there, staring at me. Eventually I went back to sleep, still under the assumption it was my kid cousin acting up. The following morning I went into the kitchen searching for my cousin. I remember asking my mom where she was at and she told me my cousin never came by that night. Fast forward a couple years, more spooky shit continues going on in the house, so my mother brings in a lady to bless the house. When the woman walked into my room I remember the look on her face. She stopped and looked around, whispering prayers. The woman stopped her whispers and asked my mom, "Have you had a daughter that's passed?" Of course I'm the only living daughter, so I tell the woman no, it can't be possible. But my mom spoke about how before I was born she had miscarried another girl. The woman continued on describing my unborn sister. She had curly hair like me, she enjoyed playing with dolls, and according to the woman she came often to visit me. Years ago, I was at Boy Scout camp with my troop. I was standing by our fire pit with one of my friends as the sun set. Our campsite was mostly empty due to the other scouts participating in a water polo tournament, or some other beach activity, set up by the counselors. There were no cats in the campsite, or area surrounding the camp, at least according to the counselors, when this occurred. By our fire pit there was prickly brush that had very little green vegetation to conceal the ground beneath it. My friend is the type to mess with me, but I told this story so many times while in his presence that he would have gotten sick of it and would have told me if he was just messing with me in order for me to stop talking about it. I was standing with my friend by the fire pit when I looked to the side of the fire pit and see a short-haired black cat with amber eyes smelling the ground. I comment to my friend about the cat, as I'm one of those people that just randomly says words about the things around them, and he asks, "What cat?" I gesture with my head towards the cat and say, "That cat." He says, "I don't see a cat." I point at it and say, "That cat." He just gives me a look, so I walk closer to the cat to where I'm about 5 feet away from it and I said, "That cat," again. He just gives me a look, so I walk right up to the cat, as in right up, and point straight down at the cat, saying determinedly, "That cat." I look at him and he continues, just blinks at me. I look down at the cat and it looks up at me, seeming to only just realize that I could see it. It turns around and starts walking towards one of the thorn bushes at the edge of the fire pit, but before it gets there, it just vanishes. I don't mean like poof in a puff of smoke or it walked behind a bit of tree stump and didn't cross back into my line of sight. I mean that as it was walking, my brain was processing it was walking, and when it disappeared my brain expected it to keep walking, but it couldn't handle the counterlogic of what was actually going on. It was like there were missing frames, like if you were watching a film on a film reel and someone decided to cut out 5 seconds of a scene mid-sentence and moved on to another character talking instead. You noticed that it wasn't something terribly too specific that was missing, but it was still important enough to you that you noticed it wasn't there. The cat wasn't ghostly at all. It looked like I could have reached down and petted it at any moment, something I was actually considering doing until it up and disappeared. I've had several experiences with the paranormal over the years, but this was the experience that really caused me to reevaluate everything I knew and had experienced about the world. My friend still says he never saw a cat. When I was about 8, my mom and I lived with some family friends. During winter I was staring out their window looking at the snow, and out of the corner of my eye I see my grandmother. I've only seen her in photos mainly because she committed suicide before I was 1. From the corner of my eye I could see white slippers, what looked like to be one of those nightgowns some old people wear, and the bottom of her dark brown curls. Obviously, this startled me and I ran to go tell my mom about this because they were really close. I stopped for some reason and looked at the floor and slowly looked up and realized that she was in front of me. Once I realized what just happened I went and told my mom. She said that my grandmother was looking after me since we were going through a hard time and that I always should consider her my guardian angel after that. I still don't understand what I saw. When I was in 4th grade I just moved into my dad and stepmom's house. My sister and I slept in bunk beds, hers being the bottom and mine the top. The bed rested against the wall with the door at the foot of the bed. One night I'm sleeping at the head of the bed and I wake up and hear some weird noises. At first I think it's my sister, but I poke my head down and see that it's not. Something compels me to look out the door and into the hallway. I scoot down to the foot of the bed and stick my head out the top of the foot frame and face my parents' bedroom door that is across from mine. I look to the floor and there is this pitch black human looking thing on the ground. I don't know what I did, but it noticed me and it scuttles or crawls fast across the floor and up my bunk ladder, and I just remember seeing black. I remember waking up that morning at that same spot of the bed. If anybody has an idea of what this is, it would help a lot. My family in general has attracted many spirits to themselves, so it's something I kinda grew up with. My personal experience happened a long time ago. I was 5 or 6. My grandmother had just passed away, and it was a few days after her memorial, where we had spread her ashes. Now, my grandmother loved animals, and had tons. She had snakes, toads, chinchillas, tarantulas, and quite a few cats. The cats were very sweet, and also very smart. 2 of the cats, Lancelot and Arthur, liked to play in the kitchen. Arthur was an all-white kitty that for whatever reason liked to play with the oven. He could open it himself, and liked to rest in there. It was never on, my grandmother always kept it unplugged and all that so he could have his spot. On that day, a week after my grandmother's memorial, my uncle, her youngest brother, came to help clean out the house and take the kitties to his ranch, where he helped foster all kinds of animals. We were looking for Arthur, we couldn't find him. Everyone was out in the garden looking for him, but I heard light slamming in the kitchen. I wandered in, and my grandmother was standing there. I was shocked, and a little scared, but she looked like she was making something, as she would when she was alive. She was very focused on it for a few seconds when she noticed me. She gave me one of her sly smiles she used to give me when she would play a prank, or do something my mom would disapprove of, and put a finger to her lips. She pointed at the oven door, which was still shaking. I looked at it, and when I looked back at her, she was gone. I opened the oven and it was poor Arthur trying to get out. Afterwards, I didn't think much of it. In fact, I had forgotten it until my mom and I exchanged personal ghost stories not long ago. I didn't believe in the paranormal until after my mother died. I was with her every single day the last 2 years of her life as the cancer took over. We shared so much joy and laughter, even though we knew she was going to die. This allowed us to talk about death a whole lot. I asked her to let me know she was in heaven and still around. I just didn't think it would really happen. The first thing that happened was electrical. I had an iPhone that bricked back in October. I took it to Apple twice and they told me it was no good. I was mad because I've had iPhones since they were released and never had one completely brick. I was also really upset because it had videos from my mom's birthday and our family vacation. I didn't put it on the cloud and regretted it more than you'll ever know. Anyway, I tossed the phone in my desk drawer and bought a new one. Life went on and I forgot about it. Well, the night of my mom's funeral I was editing her video to play the next day and I grew frustrated because I didn't have many good times videos. About 2 a.m. my phone kept popping up with that little Apple message that says enter your Apple ID. I kept putting in my ID and then it'd pop up yet again. No lie, it did this like 10 times before suddenly it all hit me. I literally said out loud, there is no way. As I walked to my home office, I pulled open the drawer and sure enough, that dang phone that bricked 7 months ago was now fully back to life. I swear on everything. I cannot make this up. So I was able to get the videos and put them on the cloud and her video was beautiful. To this day, that old phone works. That was just the beginning though. I was scared of birds and my mom knew this. My mom died in April. Well, a couple weeks later I refused to get out of bed and this woodpecker started pecking outside my window. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? It drove me crazy because every morning that thing would start early and wouldn't stop. Then on Mother's Day I kept hearing this knocking sound against my bedroom window. I look out and all of a sudden these little baby birds popped out of the flower pot. I don't like birds, but I could appreciate the fact that they were babies and it was Mother's Day. I can't explain it, but it made my day seeing new life and I just knew in my heart they were meant for me. But that was just the beginning. Since then the same gray dove sits outside literally every single time I walk the dogs. I travel for work and it never fails. I go outside for a run and there's one single dove sitting there. My skeptic self started to think I was hallucinating or imagining things, so I started taking pictures of the stuff. I see a red cardinal every day, too. God is my witness, I've also found 20 feathers since she's died. And guess what color they are? I've only found one white one. The rest are gray dove feathers. I've also had odd visitors. One Friday I was at my lowest point. Finances were hard, I just had no desire to keep moving on and I felt like everyone had disappeared now that she was gone. Anyway, the doorbell rang and it was odd because the dogs never barked. When I opened the door, this maternal Hispanic woman was standing there with a man in a suit. The man said, "We came to tell you that we are so sorry you lost your mom." The moment he said that sentence, tears came flowing down my face. I can't explain how much I needed someone to just acknowledge my pain. Anyway, he asked if they could pray and explained that the woman didn't speak English. It was the most incredible / surreal moment of my life. Afterwards they handed me $400 and said their son owed my dad money and to give it to him. We were really struggling financially, so I knew my dad would be so happy. When he got home, I gave him the money and my dad looked at me like I was a ghost. He said no one owes me any money and I don't know anyone by that name. To this day, we have no idea who the strangers were, but from that moment on, our healing really started. Sometimes things happen where you just know there is a higher power orchestrating it all. I was so hard-headed, but I could no longer deny all these occurrences. I also became really at peace and happy and just got back to my normal self. It really sped up my healing and I just knew my mom was at peace and one day I'd see her again. One other big moment was I went to Estes Park, Colorado, last month to hike alone. I was waiting for the shuttle and there was this YMCA camp going on. I'm talking hundreds of kids everywhere and I was kind of in a daze and staring in space when this little girl came up to me. She said, "God told me to bring you this letter." It was so unexpected, I kind of was like, huh? Then she said, "Can I read it to you first?" First she read a scripture. The scripture said basically, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Then at the bottom the note said I was loved and I'm not alone and now it's time for me to go and live my life. I will never be able to put into words what this moment was like for me and how surreal the entire thing was. No one knew I was in Estes Park and there were literally hundreds of kids everywhere and this random girl just popped over and happened to give me a note in scripture like that. She was about 12 and she told me she didn't understand it either. God just told her to write something down and give it to me. You see, this scripture is about a woman who bled for many years and she touched Jesus and was healed. Why is this significant? Well, before my mom got breast cancer, I had a blood cancer I battled for many years. Many of my symptoms had returned and this weighed heavily over my heart. The fear of going through this battle all over again, but this time alone, grappled me. That note meant more to me than anything else I'd ever received. It gave me the courage to get my cancer scans because I trusted that my faith healed me, whether it was physically or spiritually. I've never felt more at peace than in that moment. Anyway, those are just a few of 20 more crazy circumstances that have happened in the last few months. Paranormal activity usually gets a bad name, but it's been far from scary for me. I know there are a lot of people on Reddit who don't like any mention of God or stories like mine, but they are the truth and they are real. They really happened to me. I'm just honored to experience them because I was scared of death. I miss my mom so much, but these little winks she sends my way give me great hope. I am no longer afraid of death and finishing my life without her. I know life continues on beyond this realm and it gives me peace. I used to live in a very old house and shit would happen that you just could not explain rationally. It's really hard for me to explain to people because it sounds like I'm nuts, but my mother also experienced a lot of it. Doors would open/close and slam at random. I witnessed this firsthand dozens of times while living there. Now you could say that it could have been air pressure causing it or some type of draft. That absolutely wasn't the case. Something that also happened is TVs would turn off/on. One thing that happened frequently would be you would leave a room and the TV would turn off behind you. Random noises like footsteps and knocks. You would often wake up and the door you knew was shut would be wide open. This house had a lot of older iron door latches and whatnot, and you could clearly hear those turn when doors would open. In this house there was a main living room and a sub-living area. Between the two there was a door. I once sat on the couch and watched the doorknob turn and the door slowly creep open. My mom and I had moved into this house because she married the man that owned it. Shortly after moving there passed away. And his previous wife had died in the house as well, and he always told stories about weird shit happening in the time I had knew him. Our family vacations when I was a kid was always camping and hiking. Lots of hiking. Usually somewhere in Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee. We went to the Blue Ridge Mountains pretty often. We always did day hikes, so we'd get to the peak and back down in one day without worrying about nightfall. We were at the top of one of the mountains and I was messing around climbing up on this rock that was even higher up. I walked around the taller rock and this guy, walking stick in hand, red shorts, white t-shirt, is standing there. It surprised me a bit because I didn't know someone else was on this part of the mountain, and he smiles at me and goes, "Careful. It drops off over here." And he walked around the bend a little out of sight, and I followed. Saw the huge drop off, but no fellow hiker. Anywhere. He wasn't there. I turned around and walked back and met up with my parents again and told them about this. My dad said it must have been a guardian angel. I don't know what it was. Paranormal? Maybe. Not spooky. Just a friendly warning. There was no one in that whole mountaintop area that looked anything like him. He didn't walk past me to go back down. It was very, very real. I can honestly not explain it. Moved into a house with 3 other buddies in the winter of 2015. Everything was going great, my first place I lived in after moving out of my parents' house. After a few weeks, I started hearing strange things in the house, and also particularly in my room downstairs. Now I've always been interested in the paranormal, but nothing had happened personally to me until this one night when shit started going crazy. My buddy, who didn't live there, and I were in my room with the door closed playing some Skate 3, and paused it to look on our phones for a bit. All of a sudden we hear a loud meow which sounds like it's inside the room. There were 2 cats in the house, so this wasn't too strange, but then it happened again even louder. No cats in the room. We both looked at each other as the meowing continued, each time louder and louder, accompanied now with the sound of footsteps. I wish I could explain how alien sounding these cat sounds were, but we were so frozen that neither of us thought to start recording. Later that evening I went up to my roommate who used to have that room when he was younger. This house was his parents' place, and casually asked him if he ever had anything unusual happen to him in there. First thing out of his mouth is, "Yeah, dude, I used to hear cat sounds all the time, and almost weekly I would feel a cat jump onto my bed and sit on me." Without even mentioning what happened to me, he went on with stories for a few minutes about creepy cat stuff happening to him. Some very weird shit went down over the course of the next few months, such as random objects showing up in different places, waking up in the middle of the night to objects moved around in the bathroom, my roommate waking me up just hysterical cause his TV was turning on and off, and a locked door opening with the only key for it being 100 km away. I can elaborate on any of these if anyone wants. The last time something happened to me was when I was cleaning out a dresser on the final day of moving out. I had all the drawers open, picking up my last few items when I jumped back due to a fury of scratching sounds from inside the drawers. It was so real sounding that I literally ran out of the room, and I still haven't set foot in that room since that day over 2 years ago. We all talked about it afterward, and we figure it was either that there has been quite a few cats who have passed on the property, and or their grandma who passed away while we were living there had something to do with it. I haven't told this story to many people because it sounds crazy, but everything I experienced felt so real that I'm definitely convinced in something now. Driving home from my parents' house last winter, around 9 p.m., no other cars on the road. I was flipping through the radio stations, probably not paying as much attention to the road as I should have been, trying to find something interesting to listen to. I looked up from the radio and see what I thought might be a blue plastic bag or something on the road just ahead. My eyes fixated on it as I tried to stop. It looked completely still and surreal, like really dense and really calm smoke, completely motionless. ABS kicked in, but I couldn't stop in time. I didn't hear a thud, but I got out to look anyway. This is in rural Maine near a college. It's really not uncommon to see wildlife in the road, especially with trash from the college. I've seen raccoons with bags stuck on their heads, dogs carrying around trash bags, all sorts of critters. I wanted to make sure I didn't hit one, so I got out to check. I looked all over outside. No tracks on the road besides my own tire tracks. No footprints. I had to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was steam from a storm drain? Not many storm drains in the middle of nowhere, Maine. I looked all over the road for an explanation. Finally, I shined my light over towards the woods and I was stopped, I shit you not, directly next to a cross on the side of the road where a pedestrian had been hit and killed a few years ago. Immediately the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I felt my entire body tingling. I got out of there pretty quick. What convinced me was I saw it happened, and my cousin saw it with me. Was cruising through some rural areas in my cousin's car, I wanna say 1 or 2 a.m, weren't smoking or drinking, just having a nice cruise. Went on this road that went through some heavy woods, but we did it before so we had no fears. It was dark, of course, no moon, with just a slight sprinkle of rain. We were coming to this part in the woods where there was a street light, but it was an old light, was dimming out. There used to be an old building there, but was tore down, but the light stayed up for a few years. Mind you, this was very rural, no one lived nearby for maybe 20 miles, so it was extremely rare you pass another car, let alone another person at this time. Didn't help that the locals said stay out of the woods at night. I was just looking out my window at the woods when we were coming up to the light. Next thing I know, the car does a movie turn, like stomp the brakes, do a 180, and fucking burn rubber the other way. I get weirded out and look back through the car. I see the road illuminated by the street light, and see this massive black figure beside the road. It takes one step, and it's in the middle of the road, another step and it's already on the other side. Immediately I look forward, scared out of my mind, look at my cousin, see intense fear on his face. We don't say a word to each other, and he drops me off. I stay up till sunrise and finally go sleep. Funny now that I think about it, we never talked about once, not after it happened. But yeah, we saw Bigfoot, as do the locals who tell similar stories. When I was 11, I became severely anorexic. The hospitals in town at the time tried everything, including feeding tubes in my nose, and nothing could get me to eat. So my parents heard about this hospital in Chicago, a 2-hour drive from where I lived, that had a good reputation and sent me there. For the next 3 weeks, I'd continue to get worse and worse, and it got to the point to where I was on the brink of organ failure. Found out later on that I was only a few days away. The doctors working with me were increasingly frustrated and almost seemed ready to give up on me. But one day this doctor I'd never seen on the floor before shows up in my room. I was on bed rest the time due to how weak I was. Looked like a younger guy, like he was just starting out. He walked in, introduced himself as Dr. Dale, and sat down with a box of toys for me, and we played and talked. The next 2 days are blurry now, but I distinctly recall going to the playroom, this was a children's ward obviously, and playing on the Nintendo and going for little walks around the floor. Now, I wasn't actually supposed to do this, and one of the nurses actually called him out on it, but he sort of waved his hand, said it was fine, and on we went. The third day, he came back to my room with his hands behind his back as if he were holding something and said, "I've got a surprise for you." He had a rhinoceros plushie in his hands. Rhinos were my favorite animal at the time. "I know it's your favorite, I got it at the gift shop," he said. After that, he told me that he had a code blue to see to and that I may not see him again. And I didn't. But I ate an apple that day, and slowly began to recover in the following weeks. When I was healthy enough to leave, my parents came and picked me up and asked where I got the plushie. I told them that Dr. Dale gave it me. Now, being parents, and realizing that some strange guy apparently is giving gifts to their daughter, they obviously asked the staff who the guy was. Of course no one knew what I or my parents were talking about. There was no Dr. Dale, and they didn't know where the plushie came from and assumed it was from my parents from home. As we were walking out, I had the presence of mind to check the gift shop to see if they had another plushie, but they didn't, which could be a supply-demand thing, I guess. I made a full recovery and I haven't had a full relapse since then, almost 20 years strong, and I still have the plushie. Now, as I grew up, I become very skeptical of my experience. Dr. Dale could have been an alias, but who does that? How could no one else have noticed him, and why did he just disappear? Why just me? There were others in the ward at the time, too. It couldn't have been a hunger-induced hallucination, or I wouldn't have the plushie. I occasionally visit the hospital's website and look for his name, but obviously I come up empty. I still have no idea what happened. I'm still just trying to accept that something I just don't or will never understand happened, and it was for the better. I go camping and multi-day hiking as a hobby. I've been stalked by a mountain lion before and have been hopelessly lost 100 miles from anything, so I know the woods. The weirdest thing I've ever heard was a wailing in the night. I'd what this thing was, but I woke up around 2 a.m., my fire had died and there was an overcast, so it was pretty much completely dark. I was camped in a ravine-like valley, cutting through the mountains of Tennessee. This noise was in the valley coming right at me. From some distance over 500 yards it really sounded like a man yelling in deathly agony. If you've ever heard somebody's yells who are passing due to trauma, that is how it sounded. It's an odd thing and unsettling to describe. Anyways, I was lying in the dark, gun in hands, while this thing was getting closer and closer. Within 300 yards, it stopped wailing and left me in silence. A couple minutes after it stopped, I could hardly make out a figure in the dark about 25 yards to my right. Whatever it was tall, at least 5 feet so, and it was moving roughly west to east at a pretty good pace, making absolutely no noise as it went. It seemed to be gliding along. There was no lateral movement with this thing. It just went by and I heard it wail a couple more times far down the valley. The next day I checked for tracks and didn't find any of significance, just old deer tracks. I still have no idea what could have made that noise. It was hauntingly human and sounded extremely distressed. I still don't believe in the paranormal, but that definitely made me question it.